My son told his wife, "She's so dumb she signs anything." Then they planned to cash in on my life insurance while I was still alive. I cooked for them, gave them money, smiled at them, while they waited for me to die. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're wrong. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next haunting episodes we bring to you. I never used to be afraid of quiet. In fact, after my husband passed, silence was the only thing that made sense anymore. It didn't ask questions. It didn't walk on eggshells. It didn't forget my birthday. It just was constant, soft, and familiar. My name is Grace Harper. I'm 70 years old, a retired literature teacher from Maple Creek High, and for the past 13 years, I've lived alone in the same little house my husband and I bought in 1984. Back then, it had peeling paint, a crooked front step, and no porch to speak of. We built all that together, nail by nail, week by week, paycheck by paycheck. We filled it with books and plants and laughter. Even now, though it's quieter, the air still smells like rosemary and the pages of old paperbacks. That Thursday morning started like any other. The sun filtered in through the sheer kitchen curtains just right, golden soft, like melted honey. I'd just finished my morning tea and was tying on my garden apron when I noticed the small note I'd stuck to the fridge 2 weeks ago. Lemon cake fresh, mint smile. 70. I didn't feel 70. My joints creaked more sure, and sometimes I forgot where I put my glasses. But I still woke with purpose. I still had rituals, morning stretches, herb watering, journaling, the occasional crossword, and of course looking forward to visits from Daniel and Emily, my only son, and his picture-perfect wife. They were supposed to stop by around noon. Just a short visit, they'd said. Emily had texted the night before. "We got you something you're going to love. It's sentimental." I smiled at that. Emily was always a little too polished, a little too curated. She said the right things, wore the right shoes, hosted the right dinner parties. She was the kind of woman who made everything look effortless, even sincerity. Still, I was grateful. They were busy. They had a toddler now, and Daniel had just started some kind of boutique investment firm with partners I'd never met. He spoke about it often in terms that sounded more like TED Talks than conversation. But today wasn't about business or formality. It was about me. Just a quiet afternoon to mark another year. I baked a lemon sponge cake, sliced fresh fruit, and made a pitcher of mint tea with honey. Around 11:45, I stepped outside to water the garden. The air smelled clean, a little cool, the kind of air that felt like it had been freshly laundered. I moved slowly among the herbs, basil, sage, thyme, humming an old Carole King tune under my breath. The hose looped over my wrist, water misting in lazy arcs across the flower beds. I paused at the rosemary bush Robert and I planted together our first spring here. It had grown wild and tall, defiant like always. I laughed quietly. "Still the stubborn one," I murmured, and then I heard the gate creak. Mom, Daniel called. I turned just as he pushed through the gate, a brown paper bag under one arm, and Emily walking briskly behind him in wedge sandals, her hair in a flawless chignon. "You didn't have to come all the way back here," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "We wanted to surprise you," Daniel said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. He smelled like expensive cologne and espresso. Emily handed me a small gift bag with gold tissue paper poking out the top. "Happy birthday, Grace," she said with that familiar half-smile. "Thank you," I said, taking it gently. It had some weight to it. They followed me inside. I brought out the cake, and we sat around the kitchen table like we always did. Light chatter, occasional laughter, Daniel checking his phone more than once. Emily asked about the garden and complimented the mint tea. After a while, she gestured toward the gift bag. "Go on, open it." I peeled the paper carefully. Inside was a wooden picture frame, smooth and dark with a cherry finish. Inside the glass was a new family photo I hadn't seen before, taken during our last Sunday lunch. Daniel held the baby in one arm. Emily rested her head on his shoulder, and I sat beside them on the garden bench, smiling wide. It was a beautiful photo. I'll admit it warmed me. "Thank you," I said softly. "We thought you'd like something for your bookshelf," Emily said. "A little daily reminder." I ran my hand across the polished edge. It's lovely. They didn't stay long. Daniel had a client call. Emily had to pick up the baby. They kissed my cheeks and waved as they disappeared out the front door. "We love you, Mom," Daniel called as he got into the car. I stood at the door for a moment watching the car disappear down the street. Then I went back to the garden. I didn't see the route. I'd left the hose on the edge of the path and my foot caught under it just as I turned to reach the rosemary. My body pitched forward, hands out, the metal watering can thudding beside me. My knees hit the ground. A burst of pain shot through my right leg. "Damn it," I hissed, sitting up. My palms were scraped, but not badly, just sore. I sat for a moment, letting the shock fade. The wind rustled gently in the trees. I looked around to gather my things, and that's when I saw it, the picture frame. It had fallen from the garden bench where I'd set it while watering the flowers. The glass had cracked straight down the middle. I reached for it slowly, brushing away a chip of soil from the corner. That's when I noticed the backing had loosened. The little metal clips that held the frame together had been bent slightly outward. Curious, I turned it over completely, and that's when I saw it. A black USB stick wedged deep into the frame behind the photo and backing board. My first thought was simple: why? Why in the world would there be a USB hidden in a picture frame? It didn't make sense. I turned it in my hand. No label, no markings, just clean matte black plastic. It hadn't been there long. There was no dust, no scratches. It had been inserted recently. I looked back at the cracked photo, then at the USB again. I didn't know what I was looking at yet, but I knew what I was feeling, the faint buzz of something wrong. Something too precise to be accidental. A picture frame that was too perfect. A gift that was too well-timed. A hidden object in a place no one was meant to look. I stood up slowly, knees aching, and limped back into the house. I slid the USB into the old laptop I kept in the guest room. It whirred to life with a faint groan. The screen flickered. One folder, private docs. I clicked it open. There were 4 subfolders: loans, investments, joint accounts, and exit plan. Each name was typed in all caps. Sterile, cold, almost corporate. My chest tightened. I clicked into loans first. Immediately, PDF files filled the screen. Dozens, maybe more. Loan agreements with various banks and fintech firms. Most bore my full legal name, Grace Harper, my address, my former Social Security number, my digital signature. Every single one. I scrolled faster. The sums were enormous. Some in the 6 figures. Personal guarantees, co-signed business ventures, refinancing agreements, balloon payments. I opened joint accounts next. There were statements from accounts I'd never opened, some in banks I'd never heard of. Transfers to names I recognized only from Daniel's phone calls. Partnerships, he called them. Temporary liquidity solutions. But my name was always there. I was always the second signer, or worse, the primary. Then I clicked exit plan. It was a single document, just one, a plan. Bullet pointed, clear, merciless. Trigger insurance payout before fiscal year end. Redirect assets under Harper LLC to Emily. Ensure cognitive decline narrative is established prior to final transfer. No risk expected, full control secured. My breath left me like a stone dropped in a well. I stared at the screen. I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't move. Somewhere in the background a bird chirped once and then fell silent. And just like that, 70 didn't feel like a quiet victory anymore. It felt like a trap. Grace Harper hadn't moved from the chair in over an hour. The USB stick remained firmly lodged in the side of her old laptop, glowing with a soft, blinking blue light, as if pulsing in rhythm with her panic. The screen was crowded now. Dozens of files opened, minimized, reopened, stacked like fragile dominoes, each one revealing something worse than the last. Her trembling fingers hovered over the trackpad, her eyes scanning rows of numbers, signatures, and seals that all pointed back to her. Her name, her Social Security number, her address. Everything traced back to her like she had orchestrated the whole thing herself. But she hadn't. Of that she was certain. She hadn't applied for any of these loans. She hadn't signed 6 multi-page real estate contracts. She hadn't authorized high-risk property investments in Nevada, New Mexico, or Colorado. She hadn't poured $150,000 into a speculative beachfront development labeled Phase 3, Client GH, in a folder named Risk Tier A, Harper Access. And yet there it was, on screen, in black and white. She was the Client GH. She clicked deeper into one file titled Joint Mortgage Transfer Liberty Line Holdings. There was her name again, Grace Elaine Harper, in the borrower line, in the collateral line, in the liability clause. The co-signer, a blank box, no other names, only hers. She leaned back in the chair, heartbeat slamming beneath her ribcage like a bird trapped behind glass. Every detail in the documents had been crafted to look legitimate. Immaculate headers, bank logos, digital timestamps. Even the notary seals looked real. They weren't trying to hide it. That was the most disturbing part. Whoever did this wasn't hiding. They were counting on something more reliable than secrecy. They were counting on her not looking. She reached for her glass of water and realized her hand was shaking so badly she couldn't grip it. It clinked against the coaster and nearly tipped over. She steadied it with both hands and took a slow sip, trying to push the metallic taste out of her mouth. Then she clicked the final folder, Exit Plan. Just seeing the name made her stomach twist. She hesitated for only a second before opening it. Inside one document, just one, the title, Life Insurance Policy, Harper. Final, PDF. Her mouth went dry. She double-clicked. It opened to a clean, sharply formatted insurance form. Provider Shield Guard Financial. Coverage $1.25 million. Policyholder Grace Harper. Beneficiary Daniel Harper. The effective date just 6 months ago. Her birthday was listed as the trigger date for policy review. Her 71st, next year. There was a clause highlighted in digital yellow at the bottom of the first page. In the event of mental incapacitation, policy may be converted to early payout upon executor authorization and beneficiary confirmation. She stared at that sentence for a long time, mouthing the words silently. In the event of mental incapacitation. She wasn't even sure what happened in the moments after that. The house faded away. So did the warm yellow glow of the kitchen lights. The ticking of the antique wall clock, the hum of the fridge. Everything dissolved into the quiet roar of disbelief growing in her chest. She scrolled quickly through the rest of the document, her signature again at the bottom, next to a digital timestamp, same as all the others. She didn't remember signing anything like this, but there it was. The little looping curl of her G, the sharp flick of the H. Her signature was practically her fingerprint-specific, consistent. But what if someone had copied it? What if Daniel had? No. That thought wouldn't form all the way. It cracked halfway through like glass under heat. What did I sign, she thought. When did I sign? Was I there? She reached for her reading glasses and placed them on the bridge of her nose, even though she wasn't reading anymore. She just needed something between her and the weight of what she was seeing. The documents weren't hiding. They were methodical, systematic. Whoever created this structure had built it over time. This was no accident. It was architecture. And Grace, unknowing, trusting, blind, had been the foundation stone. She opened her browser and typed in Shield Guard Financial, legitimate, national, established in 1996. This wasn't a back alley scam. It was real. That meant the policy was real. That meant the debt, the accounts, the assets, were all legally binding. Her hands fell away from the keyboard. The laptop's fan whirred. The cursor blinked in the search bar, waiting for her next move. But Grace just sat there, her breath shallow, her heart knocking inside her chest like it had never been meant to fit there. Had Daniel used her? Had Emily helped? She thought about the smile on Emily's face that afternoon. How perfect it looked. How calm. How practiced. Grace stood up, dizzy. She held the edge of the table until her balance returned. Her legs ached as she moved to the living room and sat down in the old floral armchair by the front window. The house creaked as it always did around 8 p.m., a subtle settling. Tonight it sounded different, more like something shifting. The picture frame was still cracked. She hadn't thrown it out. It sat leaning against the lamp, split down the middle like a symbol of something she hadn't yet dared say out loud. Her son, her only son, the boy she'd raised after Robert died, the one who asked her to co-sign just a few years back for a small real estate project. The one who said, "You don't need to understand all the documents, Mom. I've got it covered." The one who kissed her cheek told her she was the rock of the family and handed her legal pads with yellow sticky notes on where to initial. That same son had named himself the beneficiary to a life insurance policy tied to her mind falling apart. She gripped the armrest tightly. Why, her mind whispered, why would he do this? And deeper still, when did I stop asking questions? She had always been so careful. With students, with taxes, with bills, she was never reckless. So how had she let this happen? How had she become the woman sitting in her own home, surrounded by liabilities she didn't recognize, properties she didn't own, and debt she didn't agree to? She didn't pick up the phone. Daniel would know something was wrong if she called. Emily would sense hesitation. Grace had spent a lifetime learning how to read voices between the lines. She knew how people sounded when they were bluffing, or lying, or holding their breath. No, she wouldn't give them that chance. Not yet. Instead, she sat in silence, letting the weight of the truth settle into her bones. It was almost midnight when she finally moved again. The tea on the stove had long gone cold. The air in the kitchen was dense with forgotten warmth. She poured it down the drain. The click of the cup on the porcelain sink echoed. She moved slowly, deliberately back toward the laptop. Her hands no longer trembled. Her face no longer showed fear, only stillness. She removed the USB stick and slid it back into its original hiding place behind the cracked photo frame. Then she placed the frame back into the bag it came in and folded it shut. She walked to her bedroom, pulled the closet door open, and reached to the top shelf where Robert's old lockbox still sat untouched. She placed the bag inside and closed the lid. Click! She stood in front of the mirror a long time before climbing into bed. Her reflection looked different. The woman staring back at her wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. She was waking up. Grace Harper pulled the quilt up to her chin and turned off the lamp. Somewhere in the back of her mind, the sentence repeated like a heartbeat. They think I'm still asleep. She closed her eyes and smiled. The following morning arrived, but Grace Harper did not rise at her usual hour. She sat motionless at the kitchen table, her back stiff, her eyes fixed on the morning light cutting in slats through the blinds. The mug of tea in front of her had long since gone cold. She hadn't touched it. The silence was heavy now, not thoughtful, not peaceful. It pressed inward from every wall. Sleep had visited her briefly like an old friend too nervous to stay. What woke her truly was not the chirping of birds or the ache in her knees. It was a sentence echoing in her mind with the clarity of a church bell. You don't need to read all this, Mom. It's just a small business thing, a formality. Daniel's voice. She had heard that tone more than once. Not loud, not forceful, just confident, assuring, wrapped in affection like a warm coat. Her hands, weathered and veined, slowly reached for the kitchen drawer. She pulled out a leather-bound notebook, the one Robert had gifted her for their 30th anniversary. It had sat quietly beneath a stack of unread magazines for years untouched. Until now, she opened to the first few blank pages, then flipped backward until she reached entries from 3 years ago. Her eyes scanned the penciled notes. March 12th. Daniel brought Thai takeout. Had me sign refinancing docs. Said it was just a better rate. May 2nd. Helped babysit so Emily could meet some client. Daniel asked me to sign updated form, said something about tax ID correction. August 8th. Daniel stressed, said his business partner backed out. Needed a co-signer just for show. January 16th. Signed property reassessment. Claimed it was for city compliance. I didn't understand it, but I trust him. Trust. That word felt foreign now, hollow, dangerous. Grace turned the page. March 5th. Daniel left 3 envelopes. Said, just sign where I put the stickers. I asked questions. He said, it's just that legal mumbo-jumbo. You've done so much already. There were more. Notes she'd once jotted down casually out of habit. Back then they had seemed harmless, maybe even quaint. But now they were breadcrumbs. A trail she had never realized she was leaving. Grace let out a slow, deliberate breath and closed the notebook. She knew she couldn't unravel this alone. Not anymore. Not when her name had been stapled to contracts she didn't recall. Not when there were documents stored in folders labeled with the language of exit liability insurance. Not when her own son had structured a plan around the disintegration of her mind. She needed someone who could see what she couldn't. Someone she could trust, but not blindly this time. Her mind reached for a name. Ethan Cole. 15 years ago, he had been a wiry, bright-eyed teenager with a nervous laugh and an affinity for Greek tragedies. She'd had him in advanced English literature, and while he never excelled in writing, he was a natural analyst, always dissecting subtext, always suspicious of surface-level truths. Ethan hadn't been popular, but he'd been brilliant, and she remembered something else. After class one day, when she asked him why he never raised his hand despite having the right answers, he'd said quietly, "Because in the real world, right answers don't matter unless you know who's listening." Grace hadn't forgotten that. She pulled out her old phone and scrolled through the contact list. She had kept his number almost sentimentally after he sent her a thank you email on graduation day and asked if he could ever repay her. He had written, "You taught me how to read people. That's more valuable than any textbook." She dialed the number, half expecting it to be disconnected. It rang twice, then a click. Ethan Cole. His voice was deeper now, no longer adolescent, but calm, professional. "Ethan," she said, "it's Grace Harper." There was a pause, then Mrs. Harper. "Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. How are you?" She hesitated. "I need a favor," she said, "a real one. Not something I'd ask if it wasn't serious." Another pause, then his voice softened. "Where are you? I'll come." They met that evening, just after dusk. Grace made no effort to prepare tea or tidy up. She didn't put on lipstick or fuss with her hair. She was done performing. When Ethan walked through the front door, he looked older, broader dressed in a dark windbreaker and jeans. A messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He hugged her carefully, as if unsure whether she'd shatter in his arms. "What's going on?" he asked. Grace didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for the cracked picture frame and handed it to him. "It was in here," she said, "the USB." He blinked. "Inside the frame." She nodded. He pulled a tablet from his bag and powered it on. Grace led him to the kitchen, where her old laptop still sat open on the table. "I've looked," she said. "I've seen enough to know I'm in trouble, but not enough to know how deep it goes." Ethan nodded slowly, scrolling through folders. He didn't say anything for a while, just moved through the files with the quiet, deliberate motion of someone used to walking through other people's messes. Grace sat across from him, arms crossed tightly as if trying to hold herself together. After 20 minutes, Ethan sat back. "You weren't imagining it," he said finally. Grace let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Most of this is structured like a shell network. Your name is on the front-facing contracts, which means legally you're the face. But the movement behind the scenes accounts withdrawals, asset flips. They're not you, but my signature's on everything. They used digital overlays, likely lifted it from old documents or scans. I'll find the origin points." He paused. "They weren't sloppy, Grace, but they weren't hiding either. They thought you'd never look." Grace stared at the flickering screen. "That's what scares me the most." Ethan looked up. "You're not crazy," he said. "And you're not alone." She swallowed hard. "You remember when you said I taught you to read between the lines?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah. Well, now it's your turn," she said. "Help me read between mine." He nodded. "I'll back everything up to an isolated drive. Nothing goes online, not until you're ready." Grace nodded once firmly. "I'm ready." Ethan began copying files, folders, metadata. He muttered to himself occasionally terms she didn't understand, names of programs she'd never heard. But she trusted him, not because she had to, because she chose to. And that was new. New and long overdue. The sound of keystrokes filled the room, soft, steady, surgical. Grace Harper sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes locked on Ethan Cole's face as he worked. He didn't fidget. He didn't blink often. He had the focus of someone used to dismantling digital mazes, someone who knew the stakes weren't just measured in dollars, but in lives. "I've broken into the mirrored archive," Ethan said finally. "This isn't just local. They were syncing everything through a private cloud node. Compartmentalized folders, hidden within nested directories named after real estate properties and projects." Grace leaned forward, meaning they were laundering the data trail, he explained, making sure if anyone ever accessed the outer folders, it'd look like financial planning or housing portfolios, but underneath is the rot. He turned the screen toward her. Folder after folder flickered open: Cypress Group, Boulder, Harper Holdings, Phase 2, Green Front Trust, Assets, and finally Com Channel Backup. That one stopped her breath. Com Channel, she asked, already knowing the answer. Ethan clicked it open. Inside were audio files. Dozens. All time-stamped. Some short 30 seconds, maybe less. Others stretching 3-5 minutes. The file names were vague: mtgrrec1.mp3 note, Jan 12, W-Wave voice clip, TFWD3 AC. He picked one at random and hit play. A scratch of ambient background noise, then a voice, Daniel's. She signed it, of course she did. I told her it was a co-ownership confirmation. She didn't even blink. Emily's voice followed, crisp and amused. She never asks. I swear to God, it's like signing for a UPS package with her. Daniel laughed. I could put a deed to the F-King Moon in front of her and she'd sign it. Ethan's finger hovered over the pause key, but Grace raised her hand. Let it play. Emily again, voice lower now. She's holding that old life insurance policy, though. You sure we don't need to switch that first? No need, Daniel replied. I already filed the supplemental. She's not going to make it to 80. And if this market tanks, well, let's just say I built a very soft landing. Then a soft clink, a glass set down, laughter. You know what the best part is, Daniel said, chuckling. If it all goes south, Shield Guard pays out, and we walk away with the same money, all upside. Emily's laugh was quieter, more restrained. Then she said plainly, all we need is for her to die. That's the finish line. Everything comes to us after that. Grace didn't flinch. Not yet. She just sat there, rigid, her eyes sharp and unmoving. Her chest didn't rise. Her fingers didn't twitch. The sound faded, replaced by silence. And in that silence, something settled in the space between her and Ethan. Not fear, not rage, but a clarity so brutal it felt like cold steel pressed against the inside of her ribs. Ethan cleared his throat quietly. There's more. You sure you want to keep going? Grace didn't answer right away. She reached for her tea and took a slow, deliberate sip. Her voice, when it came, was lower than usual. Controlled. Even. I've lived through my husband's death, through raising a child alone, through 2 decades of public school bureaucracy, through chemo, through watching my father forget my name, she said. She set the cup down gently. You think I'm going to stop now? Play the next one. Ethan nodded. The next recording was shorter. A snippet. Background noise, maybe a restaurant. Emily. I told the lawyer she was slipping mentally, just enough to plant the idea. Daniel smart. Keep that up and we'll have the POA completely locked in by the holidays. Emily, she leaves the stove on Daniel. She forgets names. It's not technically a lie. Daniel. Technically, he laughed. God, I love you. Grace turned her gaze toward the window. Outside, the wind stirred the rosemary bush Robert had planted decades ago. The same bush Daniel used to water with her, barefoot knees dirty, tugging at her skirt, saying, I did it. It's growing. Now he was planning her end like it was a portfolio. Ethan paused the audio. You don't have to listen to all of this. But Grace wasn't crying. Her hands were still, her eyes dry. She finally turned to him. I'm not listening to mourn, she said. I'm listening to remember. He looked confused. I want to remember every word, she continued, because if I ever forget why I'm doing this, I want their voices to remind me. Ethan exhaled slowly, then nodded. He turned back to the screen. I've isolated 3 email accounts that link directly to Daniel's financial ecosystem, he said. 2 personal aliases, 1 shared address with Emily. The shared one has the deepest threads, auto-forwards from insurance brokers, transactional updates, PDF authorizations, all under your name. He tapped the screen, bringing up a particular thread labeled Transfer Ready, GH designation confirmed. It was addressed to Daniel, CC'd to Emily. The body read, as of 3/16, Grace Harper is now the verified primary on the Harper Holdings collateral bundle. Her sign-off on the adjusted term sheet satisfies the capital call condition. Execution window 21 days. Grace stared at the line. Her sign-off. She didn't even remember holding a pen on March 16th. She whispered they timed it. They planned the window. Ethan nodded. They've been working this for a long time. Then he turned to her. But Grace, this is traceable. You're not powerless. They're leaving digital fingerprints all over this. Every authorization, every document edit, every metadata stamp, it can be unraveled. It can be mapped. Grace didn't answer. Her hands reached for the notebook again. She flipped to a clean page and began writing, slowly, carefully. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. She didn't look up. "Cataloging, building a timeline. I want it written in my hand. Why not just let me archive it all digitally?" She looked at him now, her expression sharp. "Because someday when someone tries to question what happened when they say I must have been confused or old or unreliable, they'll see my handwriting. They'll see the woman who knew what was happening. And they'll know I was awake." Ethan said nothing. He just nodded. And Grace kept writing, line after line. Not just a record, but the beginning of a reckoning. Grace Harper had always been a woman of resolve. She didn't scream when life hurt her. She listened. She watched. And when the world stopped making sense, she didn't panic. She planned. It was 3 days after the discovery of the recordings when Grace stepped into the brick building downtown with the green shutters and frosted windows. The brass letters on the door read, "Whitaker and Stern, Estate Law and Elder Defense." She had chosen her carefully. Laura Whitaker was a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones across Maple Creek's legal community. Former federal fraud investigator. No nonsense. Brilliant. Some said she had teeth under her calm voice and could peel the skin off a fraudulent trustee without ever raising her tone. That was what Grace needed now, a scalpel, not a sword. She entered the office promptly at 9:00 a.m. No makeup, gray cardigan, legal pad in her purse. No performances, just intent. Laura greeted her personally. "Mrs. Harper," she said, standing from behind her polished oak desk. "Come in. I've cleared the hour." Grace took a seat. Her voice was steady. "I'm not here to write a will," she said. Laura's lips curved slightly. "I assumed not." Then Grace reached into her bag and placed the small, worn flash drive on the desk. Laura didn't touch it right away. She studied Grace first, then nodded. "Tell me everything." For the next 47 minutes, Grace unraveled it all. Every signature she didn't remember giving, every folder Ethan had mirrored, every whisper from the recordings, and most importantly, every detail she could reconstruct from the past 3 years of blind trust. Laura didn't interrupt once. She listened the way an engineer watches a machine come apart, calculating pressure points, internal damage, and likely paths of collapse. When Grace finally finished, Laura leaned back, eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "You have enough to trigger a financial abuse inquiry and initiate a legal freeze," she said. "But if we move publicly now, you're giving them time to adjust, delete, disappear." Grace nodded. "Which is why I need to play dumb a little longer." Laura tilted her head. "You're proposing. What exactly?" Grace folded her hands. "I need Daniel and Emily to think they're winning. I want them confident, overconfident. I want them thinking the fog is rolling in, that I'm losing grip." Laura raised an eyebrow. "You want to feign cognitive decline?" "Yes," Grace said. "And while they're recording me forgetting birthdays or asking what year it is, I'll be selling every asset out from under their assumptions, quietly, legally, cleanly." Laura smiled for the first time. It wasn't patronizing. It was respect. "You'll need help," she said. "Not just me. You'll need to insulate your online presence, firewall, your digital footprint, and start documenting the performance. In writing, in video, everything." "I already have," Ethan, Grace replied. "He's handling the data." Laura nodded. "Good. I'll draw up a power of attorney revocation. Quietly. We'll log it, timestamp it, but not send notifications until you say so." They spent another hour sketching the outline of the plan asset transfers into protected trusts. The use of off-chain backups, early filings of estate amendments, and quiet sale preparations for Grace's half of the Harper property, all set to move behind the scenes, invisible to those not looking closely. Grace signed the initial counsel agreement and tucked the flash drive back into her purse. She stood. "When this ends," she said quietly, "I want them to realize they wrote the whole script with a microphone under the table." Laura reached out and shook her hand. "Then we'll let them perform." Back home, Grace sat across from Ethan with her arms crossed. "We need to take it further." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How far?" She leaned in. "I want to start playing the part." That evening, Ethan installed a small battery-powered voice recorder under the corner of the hallway cabinet. Another inside a ceramic flower vase on the coffee table. A third one, a motion-activated clip device, he slipped into the kitchen cupboard facing the dining area. He also added software to Grace's phone, an encrypted undetectable log that recorded calls and logged ambient audio cues triggered by specific keywords. Trust sign document doctor. Grace was methodical about it. She rehearsed confusion in front of her mirror the way some people rehearsed monologues. A pause before responding. A blank look when hearing a date. A gentle, uncertain laugh when asked simple questions. 2 days later, she left the kettle boiling until it whistled dry. Pretended she hadn't noticed. Emily was the first to bite. "Oh, Grace," she said sweetly. "Are you all right? That kettle's been going forever." "I'm fine, dear," Grace replied, smiling softly. "I guess I got distracted. I was looking for my keys. Or maybe my shoes. I can't remember." Emily tilted her head, just slightly. Her eyes narrowed, but her smile stayed glued in place. That evening she texted Daniel, "Emily." She forgot where her shoes were. Again, this might be the perfect window. 3 days later, they brought over a bundle of paperwork. "Just some end-of-year updates," Daniel said breezily. "You know health directives, emergency proxies. It's all just for precaution, Mom. Don't worry." Grace blinked. "Are these the same ones you brought last fall?" Emily stepped in. No, those were different. These are updated. For the trust restructuring. Remember the trust, Grace?" Grace looked down at the pages, then tilted her head like she was straining to remember. "I don't know if I follow," she said softly. Daniel patted her hand. "That's okay. We'll go over it later." And they left the packet behind. Later that night, Ethan took the documents and photographed every page. "Standard medical POA," he muttered, flipping through. "But this one," he held up a page. "This gives Daniel full authority to reallocate your assets under family care designations without additional approval. If you sign this, he owns you." "I'm not going to sign it," Grace said. Ethan looked up. "You sure they'll believe you did?" She smiled. "They'll think they saw it." He frowned. She pulled a folder from the drawer and opened it. Inside was an older document, an identical version of the POA Daniel had drafted. But this one had been doctored with her forged signature courtesy of Ethan's careful overlay technique. The document was watermarked void. Reference copy only in faint gray letters across the bottom, just subtle enough to go unnoticed in a staged photo. "Let them think I'm halfway gone," she said. "Let them take a picture of this sitting on my table next week." "They'll use it against you," Ethan warned. "That's the point," Grace whispered. "They'll show their hand." And just like that, the trap began to take shape. Emily soon began logging incidents. She kept voice memos on her phone. Sunday. Grace asked what year it was during breakfast. Tuesday. Found laundry in the oven. Claimed she was defrosting it. Thursday. Repeated the same story about her wedding 3 times in 1 hour. Grace played along with perfection. A misplaced coffee cup here, a confused expression there. Once she left the front door wide open and stood in the foyer for 15 minutes while Emily pretended to stumble upon her in a daze. Daniel grew more confident by the day. "She's slipping fast," he told Emily over the phone. "I think we can move the POA filing up. I'll talk to Danvers and have the full asset authorization ready by end of month." The audio from that call was captured in its entirety thanks to Ethan's trigger system. Grace sat in the den that evening, notebook in her lap, listening to the recording with unblinking eyes. "They're almost there," Ethan said. Grace didn't look up. She simply turned the page and wrote 3 words at the top. "Let them arrive." The pen in Grace Harper's hand felt heavier than it should have. Not because it was ornate or made of metal. It was a cheap hotel giveaway, the kind with ink that skipped if you held it at the wrong angle. But tonight, in this moment, it felt like it weighed the same as a gun. Daniel sat across from her, his smile calm, rehearsed, reverent. "Just sign on the bottom line here, Mom," he said, tapping gently at the page like he was guiding a child. "That finalizes the trust allocation." She blinked slowly. Her fingers trembled, but not from age. It was part of the act now. Every twitch, every pause, every sigh had been sharpened into performance. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "And this is for the baby." Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice. "Of course. This ensures your name stays on the documents, but it helps us manage things on your behalf, just to make life easier." "Manage," she repeated faintly, looking down at the thick document in front of her. What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the paper beneath her hand wasn't what he thought it was. Laura Whitaker had prepared it. It was a facsimile, the formatting identical, the layout perfect, but the legal content had been gutted, redacted, replaced. In reality, the document held no authority whatsoever. It was a legal decoy marked null and void, in faint watermarking only visible under ultraviolet light. Grace let her signature land on the page with practiced clumsiness. "There you go," Daniel said, practically beaming. "That wasn't so hard, right?" She smiled faintly. "You've always been good at explaining things to me, sweetheart." He laughed. "It's my job, Mom. We're a team." A team. She watched him gather the papers into the leather folder he always brought with him. That folder had probably held a dozen other traps over the years. She wondered if he ever thought about how easily a mother's trust could be harvested. Once Daniel left, Grace closed the door, locked it, and stood in silence for several minutes. Then she walked to her study, pulled open the drawer marked Property, and took out another folder, this one containing the real documents. Irrevocable transfer of ownership. Signed, notarized, sealed, and submitted to the Morning Light Children's Trust. Her home, her sanctuary, was no longer Daniel's safety net. It was no one's, except for the children who'd never have a mother to betray them. The property transfer had been executed 2 days earlier in Laura's office. Quietly, cleanly. Grace had handed over the deed with a calm that startled even herself. "I'm not giving it away," she had told Laura. "I'm reclaiming it from them before they ever got to take it." Later that evening, Ethan arrived through the back door. He had long since stopped knocking. Grace handed him a cup of tea and walked him through the day's events. "He brought the papers again," she said. Ethan opened his laptop and began uploading the footage from the hallway recorder. Grace's signature, her deliberate hand motion. Daniel's reassuring tone, everything caught perfectly. "Emily wasn't with him?" Ethan asked. "No. She's been distant. I think she's letting him take the lead now, or she's getting nervous." He nodded. "That'll help us. She's the one who watches the details. If she's disengaging," she's watching, Grace corrected, just from a distance. Then she added almost absently, "They think I've drifted, that I'm no longer here." Ethan looked up. "Are you sure this is still what you want?" Grace turned to face him fully. "I'm not doing this to win," she said. He raised a brow. "Then what?" She sipped her tea. "I just don't want them to win either." They sat for a moment in the kind of silence that only comes after too many words. Then Ethan almost hesitantly said, "You don't want to take it back?" Grace stared at the glowing recorder light still blinking softly from the bookshelf. "No," she said. "You don't always have to win the war. Sometimes you just have to burn the bridge behind them." The first crack appeared that Thursday. Emily was standing in line at the downtown branch of Westlake Trust Bank when her card was declined. Twice. She stepped to the side, dialing Daniel immediately. "It's probably just a hold," he said. "System hiccup. It's happened before." But when Emily logged into their joint investment account later that afternoon, a banner across the top read, "Access Limited, account flagged for review." She stared at the screen for several long seconds before reaching for her laptop and opening the secure client portal Daniel had used to access Grace's estate. The credentials no longer worked. She tried 3 times. Each time access denied, user privileges revoked. A pit began to form in her stomach. She opened the group text with Daniel. "Emily, have you made any changes to the client portal?" Daniel number Y. "Emily, I'm locked out, so is the bank. Something's wrong." "Daniel," she signed the docs. "I watched her." "Emily, maybe that's the problem. You watched her. Did you check them?" He didn't reply. Not right away. When he finally did, it was one word. Daniel shit. Back at Grace's home, the evening light streamed through the kitchen window, catching the edge of her ceramic sugar bowl and casting a pale gold pattern across the counter. She stirred her tea slowly, her fingers steady. Across from her, Ethan was typing rapidly. He had just finished monitoring the sync logs from Daniel's private server. "They're scrambling," he said without looking up. "There's an email from Emily to Daniel. She's asking about the authenticity of the signature. She suspects you used a decoy." Grace didn't smile. She just looked down at her notebook. She turned a page. Wrote, "Emily begins to panic, day 3. Ethan closed his laptop with a satisfying click. "You know you're not just trapping them," he said. Grace looked up. "You're educating them." She chuckled. It was dry, humorless. "I used to teach literature," she said. They should have remembered every good tragedy starts with overconfidence. Daniel hadn't pieced it together yet. He still believed she was slipping, still thought the mistakes were hers. He'd begun drafting the paperwork for full conservatorship. He'd even scheduled a meeting with a physician to evaluate her cognitive state. He was confident. He believed this would end cleanly. He had no idea the ending had already begun. The knock on the door came hard 3 times, quick and sharp, like fists that didn't understand the word boundaries. Grace Harper didn't flinch. She had been expecting this. She moved slowly down the hallway past the grandfather clock, past the framed photo of Robert that had remained untouched for nearly a decade. She took a breath before opening the door, not to greet, not to welcome, but to witness. Daniel stood on the porch. He wasn't smiling. His jaw was tight, eyes frantic but simmering under the surface. The kind of look he used to get as a child when he knew he'd been caught lying but hadn't quite figured out how to spin it yet. Emily was just behind him, silent, her arms crossed, her body tense like a drawn bow. Mom, Daniel said, stepping inside before she even spoke. "We need to talk." Grace moved back wordlessly, letting the door swing open. Her voice was quiet but calm. "Of course." The living room felt smaller with them in it. Or maybe it was the weight Daniel brought with him, the air of someone who had run out of strategies and was now counting on force. He sat without invitation, slapping a folder down on the coffee table. "This," he said, "is the updated power of attorney. Full financial and medical scope. We need you to sign it. Tonight." Emily remained standing, her eyes locked on Grace, searching for cracks in the performance. Grace tilted her head. "I thought we already handled the finances," she said slowly. "You told me not to worry." Daniel leaned forward. "That was before you started making changes. Pulling funds, freezing accounts." Grace blinked. Her lips parted like she was trying to understand. Did I do that?" Emily stepped in now, her voice dripping with condescension masked as concern. "You've been very confused lately, Grace. This just protects everyone. You don't want to make things worse." Grace reached for the folder, her hands trembling just enough. She opened it. Dozens of pages. Legalese, clauses, attachments. The final page had a signature line already prepared. Daniel pointed. "Right there. That's where you sign." She looked at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "But what if I don't want to?" Daniel didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand on the table. "You don't get to decide that anymore," he shouted. Emily flinched. Grace didn't. Daniel's voice rose further, raw and unfiltered. "You're not well. You're not even living in reality. You forget half your sentences. You leave the damn stove on. I'm the one keeping this house from collapsing." His breathing was loud, now ragged. Years of buried resentment and greed spilling out in seconds. "You think this is about you?" "About your freedom," he barked. "You're a resource, Mom. A living, breathing tool. You sign what we give you and you smile and you don't get in the way." Grace stared at him. Behind the bookshelves beneath the decorative lamp inside the coat closet, 3 separate recording devices clicked silently, catching every word. Ethan had installed them hours earlier. Grace's voice came like a scalpel. "So I'm not your mother anymore." Daniel's jaw worked. You're the person who can get us what we need. That's who you've always been. You just didn't know it." Emily finally spoke low and sharp. Daniel stopped talking. But it was too late. The room had already turned. Grace stood slowly, her eyes no longer soft, no longer blank. "Leave the papers," she said quietly. Daniel paused. "So you'll sign?" I said, "Leave the papers." Emily grabbed his arm, sensing something spiraling. "Daniel, we should go." He shrugged her off. "You better not delay this, Mom. Because if you do," Grace cut him off. "If I do, what?" Silence. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Grace stepped forward just enough to stand over him. "You came into this house," she said, "and thought you could threaten a woman who gave you everything." Daniel opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. "You thought I'd sit here old and grateful, too frail to fight back. But you forgot the one lesson I ever taught you worth remembering." He looked up. Grace leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Never mistake patience for weakness." Daniel stood tense, towering, but he didn't speak. Not now. He turned and stormed out. Emily followed, though not before casting a final glance back, one that wasn't angry but afraid. As soon as the door closed, Grace walked calmly into the study, pulled out her phone and hit send. The encrypted folder audio recordings transcribed conversations, documentation metadata uploaded to a secure drive already accessed by Laura Whitaker and forwarded to the Financial Elder Abuse Division at the State Attorney's Office. It was done. The bullet had left the chamber. Grace left that night. Not in a rush, not with tears. There was no suitcase on the porch, no panicked escape. She simply turned off the lights, fed the cat, and walked out the side door carrying only a shoulder bag and a folded letter. The house didn't cry out after her. It had done its job. On the kitchen table, tucked neatly between the bills and the pens in the ceramic holder, sat a sealed envelope. It was addressed to Daniel and Emily. Inside, "Don't try to find me. The law will know where to look. And this time it won't be asking for permission." 3 days later, Daniel was pulled from a meeting with a client by a pair of plainclothes investigators. The words financial exploitation, forgery, and elder abuse were spoken calmly, methodically. Emily received her notice the same afternoon, delivered to the front gate by a courier who didn't say a word beyond asking for her signature. They called Grace that night. Her phone rang 6 times. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the next time Daniel and Emily heard her voice, it would be from a courtroom recording, and she wouldn't be the one on trial. The beginning of the end didn't come with sirens or flashing lights. It came with a bank notification. Daniel Harper was sitting in his corner office on the 21st floor of a downtown high-rise when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, distracted. Alert: transaction failed, account hold. He frowned. Must have been a bug. He tried again, this time through the brokerage portal. Same result. Error: account access restricted. Please contact your financial institution. He blinked, then logged into the Harper Holdings Capital Reserve account. Nothing. Frozen. His breath caught. He tapped the desk hard, then harder. His heart started to tick faster. He called Emily. She answered on the 3rd ring, already breathless. "I just got a hold notice too," she said. "My debit card declined at the grocery store. The joint portfolio's inaccessible." "What the hell is going on?" Daniel was already dialing their lead investor, Vincent Kwan. Vincent's voice was cold. "We saw the report," he said. "You didn't disclose your mother's role in the collateral, or that she's revoked power of attorney." "What report?" Daniel said, sweat pooling at the back of his neck. "There's an open investigation, and I'm pulling out. My lawyers are already filing to protect our exposure." The line went dead. Daniel sat back in his chair, dazed. The skyline outside shimmered like it was laughing at him. One by one, other investors followed suit. Calls turned into voicemails. Voicemails turned into silence. By noon, the company accountant had emailed him a spreadsheet with one bold line across the bottom: operating funds below liability threshold, insolvency likely within 21 days. The press statement from Morning Light Trust dropped the next morning. "We can confirm that Mrs. Grace Harper voluntarily transferred full ownership of her estate into a charitable trust for underprivileged children. The trust was structured under independent counsel, with compliance review following verified allegations of financial coercion by her legal next of kin. All assets are now independently managed and legally firewalled from prior affiliations." Daniel read the statement 3 times. The walls around him began to pulse. The corners of his vision narrowed. He picked up his phone. Grace's name was still saved as Mom in his contacts. He hit call. It rang. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. He tried Emily next, but she wasn't answering either. Emily was already gone. By the time the headlines broke, she had packed a suitcase and disappeared into a rideshare with an unregistered burner phone. Daniel had come home to find the closet half empty, jewelry gone, her business laptop wiped. She hadn't left a note, but she had sent a text. "Don't call me. I warned you we were pushing too far." He stared at the screen, hand trembling. The doorbell rang. When he opened the door, it wasn't Emily. It was a process server, tall, stern, holding a manila envelope. "For Mr. Daniel Harper." Daniel hesitated. The man shoved the envelope into his chest and walked away. Inside was a court summons. Preliminary hearing. Elder financial exploitation and identity misuse. State of New Hampshire versus Daniel Harper. The room suddenly felt smaller, airless. He picked up his phone again. Called Grace. Again. Voicemail. He sat down on the living room couch, surrounded by the empty remnants of a life built on illusion. Miles away in a quiet cottage surrounded by pine trees and wind, Grace Harper stirred a pot of tea. She moved slowly, not from weakness, but from rhythm, the kind of rhythm that comes after a storm has passed. She placed the kettle down on the stove with quiet precision, poured the tea into a ceramic mug, and walked to the window. Outside, the wind danced across the grass. A pair of deer stepped softly beyond the fence line. Her cat Willow leapt up onto the cushion beside her, curled close. The fire crackled low in the hearth behind her. Grace didn't say a word. She just sat, watched, breathed. Her phone lay face down on the table. It had rung 32 times since morning. All Daniel, all unanswered. She had listened to one voicemail. The first one. His voice was trembling like a boy again. "Mom, I know you're upset. I made mistakes, but I didn't mean to hurt you. Please call me, please." I don't know what to do. She hadn't deleted it. She'd saved it archived with the others, stored not for revenge but for record. Some things had to be kept. Others had to be let go. She reached for her journal and opened it. Date March 22. She wrote, "The collapse is quiet, not explosive. It doesn't scream, it whispers, then disappears." She looked down at Willow and stroked behind her ears. "You always knew," she whispered. Willow purred softly. That evening, the 700 p.m. broadcast opened with her name. Anchor. In a developing story, multiple sources have confirmed that state prosecutors have opened a formal investigation into Daniel Harper, founder of Harper Holdings Investment Group, and his wife Emily Harper, following allegations of financial abuse of a vulnerable senior. The victim, Grace Harper, former educator and community advocate, was revealed to have been manipulated into authorizing high-risk investments under forged documents spanning several years. Grace Harper, now 70, has since transferred her estate to a registered trust supporting underprivileged youth. The case has sent shockwaves through Maple Creek's financial and legal circles, prompting broader calls for reform in elder financial protection. Grace didn't turn up the volume. She didn't need to hear the details. She had written them, lived them, outlived them. She leaned back in her chair, mug in hand, firelight flickering across the lines in her face. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. But for the first time in a long time, she was still, completely still. And that was enough. The sound of the pen scratching against paper was barely audible, but in that quiet room it felt like thunder. Grace Harper sat at the oak desk inside Laura Whitaker's office, its edges polished, the papers aligned with mathematical precision, the only thing out of place being Grace herself. She was dressed in a slate gray cardigan, hair pinned up neatly, no rings, no makeup, just a woman with nothing left to prove. Laura slid the final page forward. "This will formalize everything," she said. "Once you sign here, the estate is fully transferred. The new trust will activate under its designated name, Little Ember Foundation. All prior beneficiaries null and void." Grace nodded slowly, her eyes steady. Her hand didn't tremble. She picked up the pen and pressed it to the paper. Signature Grace. Elaine Harper. The moment it was done, Laura stamped it, official, irrevocable. Grace leaned back in the chair. "How long will it take to file?" "Already filed," Laura said. "Electronic confirmation came in before you walked through the door." Grace smiled faintly. "You're always 2 steps ahead." "I learned from the best," Laura said. Outside the window, a breeze ruffled the red leaves of a nearby tree. Autumn was coming early this year. Or maybe the seasons were just catching up to her. Grace stood. There was no ceremony, no glass of champagne, just closure. "I won't be reachable at the old number," she said. Laura nodded. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere quiet. High up, where the only thing demanding is the air." Laura extended her hand. Grace shook it. Neither of them said goodbye. The boxes had already been packed. Not many, just 5. Grace had lived long enough to know most memories didn't belong in frames or knickknacks. But one box, sealed in silver duct tape, was heavier than the rest. Inside were all the family photos. Wedding day. Birthdays. A Polaroid from Daniel's graduation. Another from his wedding where Grace's smile had been wide, naive. She didn't burn them. She didn't tear them up. She placed them gently in that box, wrapped in linen, sealed it, and labeled it in fine cursive. "No longer mine." Then she slid it into the closet high up on the shelf, out of reach, out of sight. She wasn't erasing the past. She was filing it away. Grace's new home sat at the edge of a ridge in Vermont, small wooden surrounded by pine. The elevation cooled the air even in summer. The trees whispered at night. She bought it under the trust's name, quietly, cleanly. The locals knew her only as Miss Grace. Within 2 weeks, she'd converted the barn behind the cabin into a one-room classroom. Folding tables, donated books, a chalkboard salvaged from a shuttered school in Brattleboro. The first children arrived quietly, no fanfare. A boy named Isaiah who never spoke unless asked directly. A girl named Fiona who read like she'd been starved for words. A set of twins who colored the same page together. She taught 3 times a week. Reading, writing, thinking. She didn't ask where they came from. She just gave them what they didn't yet know they needed attention without agenda. The school had no name, no sign, but every night when she turned off the lights, she whispered the same thing into the dark, let the fire stay lit. Late one evening after the last student had gone, Grace sat at her desk and pulled out a piece of handmade paper, the kind with raw edges and the scent of cotton and ink. She began to write. Ethan, if I had a time machine, and Lord knows I wouldn't want one, but if I did, I think I'd go back to the day I stood in front of my first blackboard and ask myself a question. What if the world you're preparing them for is more brutal than you imagined? Would you still teach poetry? Still quote Thoreau? Still ask them to underline themes in Macbeth as if it would save their lives? I think about what you did for me. Not the hacking, though God knows that helped. I mean the belief, the steadiness, the silence that didn't ask me to be anyone but who I was. You were never my student, Ethan. You were just early family. If I lived my youth again, I might not teach. I might be a hacker, not for the thrill, but because there's something holy in knowing where the wires connect, in finding the code behind the lie. You saw the trap before I did. You helped me dig under it. Thank you. I hope you're well. And I hope the people you love never mistake your quiet for weakness. G. She folded the letter, placed it in a handmade envelope, and sealed it with wax. The candle flickered. The room was still. The next morning she opened the windows wide. The sun reached into the classroom with golden arms. Grace stood in front of the chalkboard and wrote one sentence. A new story doesn't erase the old one, it just stops giving it the ending it wanted. The children arrived one by one. She greeted them with warm eyes and open hands. In that room she wasn't a victim, or a widow, or a mother. She was simply Grace, no longer grieving a name she'd once answered to, no longer carrying a house full of broken frames, no longer waiting for apologies that would never come. Just a woman on a hill with nothing left to lose and everything left to give. And that was freedom. The sentencing was not broadcast live, but the headlines landed like thunder. Daniel Harper, found guilty of financial coercion, receives suspended sentence. 10-year business ban. Emily Harper, expelled from IFA. International Finance Association, confirms lifetime blacklist. Grace Harper's case sparks national movement. States reevaluate elder financial protection laws. The courtroom had been quiet when the verdict came. No shouting, no tears. Daniel had stood stiff in a gray suit 2 sizes too big, his collar loose, his shoulders slumped forward like gravity had doubled just for him. The judge had been clear. You exploited the unconditional trust of a parent. You constructed a framework of lies to secure personal gain. Though the court has accepted a plea and recognized your lack of prior offenses, the sentence reflects the gravity of harm, emotional, financial, psychological. 10 years. 10 years of exclusion from any fiduciary role. 10 years of stripped credibility. No board seats. No financial signatures. No access. Probation. But no return. Not to what he'd been. Not to who he thought he was. Emily didn't appear in court. Her lawyers negotiated behind closed doors. The IFA issued a public statement the following week. Effective immediately, Emily Harper is no longer affiliated with any IFA-sanctioned organization. Her conduct violated ethical compliance and fiduciary standards. She is barred from all financial advising capacities indefinitely. Her social media disappeared within hours. Her name erased from websites' bios, even Google search results. What the courts didn't take, the professional world swept away in silence. The story of Grace Harper didn't vanish. It spread. It moved beyond the financial press, beyond legal circles, beyond think tanks and compliance audits. It became legend. The Maple Creek Guardian ran a front-page feature, "The Quiet Fire: How One Woman Unraveled a Family Empire to Save Herself." Local news showed her image standing beside the sign for the Little Ember Foundation, holding hands with 3 school children, her gray hair tied back in a loose braid, her smile soft but impenetrable. Her quote beneath the photo read simply, "There's no shame in starting over, only in pretending you don't need to." Talk shows discussed her courage. Elder advocacy groups cited her case in policy briefs. A podcast series titled The Will and the War launched a 5-part deep dive into her story, complete with expert interviews and anonymized transcripts. But Grace didn't read the articles. She didn't listen to the podcasts. She had already said what she needed to say without speaking into microphones. She just kept showing up to class, kept boiling tea in the same old kettle, kept writing letters to herself she never sent. It was a Wednesday evening when Daniel tried again. He was living in a second-floor apartment above a mechanic's garage on the edge of a fading industrial town. The furniture was borrowed, the walls were bare, the fridge was mostly empty except for beer and eggs. His laptop was dead, his phone cracked at the corner, but it still worked. He sat in the dark, lit only by the glow from a ceiling bulb that buzzed intermittently, and typed out one final message. "Mom, I know you won't answer. I don't expect you to. But I need you to know. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I see it now. All of it. The greed, the entitlement, the way I treated you like a vault instead of a person. I can't undo it. But I want you to know I remember the woman who made pancakes with smiley faces when I was sick. I remember the first time you taught me how to write my name. I remember how you never let me quit even when I failed. If I never see you again, I understand. But if you ever think of me, I just hope you don't think of this last year. Think of the kid who tried once to be good, and forgive him. Daniel." He sent it, then stared at the screen for 15 full minutes. The reply never came. But somewhere in a quiet valley house miles and mountains away, Grace Harper's phone vibrated once on the windowsill. She was in the kitchen, kneeling by the fireplace with Willow curled against her. When she returned to the living room, she saw the message. She read it, every word, not with anger, not with tears, just with the kind of silence that could only come from someone who had already survived the worst version of it all. She picked up the phone, let her thumb hover over the screen. Then she smiled. It was small, it was soft, and it was real. She tapped once. Delete. The screen went dark. Not in rage, not in punishment, but in release. She looked out the window at the rising moon above the treetops and whispered, "May you learn, may you carry it, may you never do it again." Then she turned off the light and slept like someone who had finally stopped waiting for an apology to set her free. The first light filtered through the pine needles like threads of gold being sewn across the sky. It was early, still damp with the cold breath of dawn, and the hills of Vermont stretched wide and untouched below the porch of the cabin. Grace Harper sat in her usual chair, rocking gently, not from age or fatigue, but from rhythm. Beside her, a chipped ceramic mug of Earl Grey rested on the railing, steam curling upward like memory made visible. Inside, laughter rang softly. Fiona was trying to spell possibility without peeking. Isaiah, patient as ever, sat beside her with a dictionary in his lap. The twins argued over whose drawing of a tree was more realistic. Grace let it drift past her like birdsong. Her eyes were on the clouds, but her ears never left the room. She'd learned to listen without watching. It was something mothers forget to do when they've been hurt, to trust joy when it returns, even quietly, even in someone else's voice. She reached for the small wooden box beside her, a new one, freshly carved, pale maple unvarnished, still smelling faintly of resin. Inside was a recorder, just a simple handheld device, the kind Ethan had first given her months ago when the world was darker, heavier. Now it was hers to use. She pressed the red button, held it in her hand for a moment, then lifted it slowly to her mouth. Her voice was steady. People think peace means forgiving, that you're supposed to open the door again, invite the storm back in, smile like nothing broke the roof. But peace is not forgiveness. It's release. It's waking up and remembering nothing is owed. That you can choose silence, not because you're weak, but because the noise no longer belongs in your house. It's watching a wound close without pressing it open again just to prove it bled. There are things you don't need to reclaim. You only need to stop letting them be stolen. She paused. The wind shifted. Inside, the children laughed again, louder this time, something about glue and a book spine, and the twins' hands now stuck together. Grace smiled into the breeze, then whispered, "I have nothing to get back, because I never lost myself. I was only waiting for the noise to leave the room." She clicked the recorder off. Later that afternoon, Grace sat at the small table by the window. The sun stretched long through the glass panes, catching motes of dust and turning them into glitter. In front of her was a frame, a simple one, wooden, unfinished. Ethan had made it for her birthday, delivered with a smirk and a note. Put something real in this one. She'd tried for weeks. She'd laid out photos, sifted through letters, even found the old newspaper clipping from the Maple Creek Guardian, but nothing felt right. So today she chose something else. She took a piece of fabric, cream-colored muslin, soft as breath, and began stitching. Not a picture, not a quote, just lines, patterns, borders, a leaf, a bird, a wave, shapes without demand, symbols without explanation. She filled the center with nothing, left it intentionally blank. When it was done, she stretched the fabric into the frame, pulled it taut, sealed the back, and stood it upright on the shelf. A frame with no image, a placeholder for whatever she chose to let be, or not. Outside, the wind stirred again. Evening had begun to arrive, slow and blue. Grace stepped out onto the porch one more time. The children had gone. The house was quiet. She stood still, feeling the boards beneath her bare feet. The air was cool now, almost cold. She closed her eyes and let it touch her face. There were no more phone calls, no more trials, no more apologies left unopened. Only this, a ridge, a porch, a fire waiting to be lit again tomorrow, and the sound of wind sliding through the trees like breath. Grace whispered into the dusk. Life begins again in the very place we thought it ended. She smiled, not for what was gone, but for what could never be taken again, fade to black, and nothing else.